This FedGov Today program is sponsored by SamDesk. On this edition of FedGov Today, the Air Force sets a new top 5 for acquisition. The next guiding principle for AI could be an oldie but goodie, and ARPA-H's cyber simulation plan to protect healthcare. ARPA-H Director Alicia Jackson will tell you about it. Welcome to FedGov Today in Washington, D.C. and around the world on the American Forces Network. I'm Francis Rose. 5 leaders in the Air Force are the first portfolio acquisition executives for the service. The Air Force is establishing the PAEs to execute on Secretary Hegseth's acquisition reform orders. Lieutenant General Luke Cropsey is the military deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. General, welcome. Great to have you on the program. How does the move to PAEs align with what Secretary Hegseth has outlined?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. So I'd say on the outset, the whole point behind where we're trying to go with acquisition transformation underneath Secretary Hegseth's leadership is really how do we increase the speed, how do we increase the volume or the number of systems, and then how do we increase the overall competition that we have in the broader defense industrial base. In order to do that more effectively, the Air Force stood up portfolio acquisition executives, and the idea was that they would collectively own the broader authorities and the decisions that are required to do that faster, better, cheaper kind of a program execution line. And we picked them largely based on the type of program they are representative of. So 5 out of the total 18 is where we started. And we used the 5 that we picked essentially as pathfinders for the rest of the team.
How are they different structurally and from a point of view of deliverables from the old PEO structure?
Yeah, so I think probably the key point in all of this are the authorities that they execute as opposed to maybe the organizational structure that they represent. So under the previous construct, PEOs largely had to go through other functional chains of command in order to get the approvals that they needed to execute. Contracting authority, engineering authority, financial authority, those kinds of things. What we've done in this construct under the PAEs is we have actually moved those authorities back to the PAE and given the PAE both the accountability, the responsibility, and the authority that they need to actually make those decisions and move out at speed.
Who all is involved in that PAE, in what goes on underneath the jurisdiction of that PAE? Does it extend all the way out to the end user and requirements writers, all those kinds of things?
So it doesn't go that far, but I will tell you that as part of this overall effort, so in addition to the acquisition transformation work, Secretary Hegseth also put into play a reformation of the requirements process itself. So as we were going after the acquisition side of this, we recognized pretty early on that, hey, if we want to transform acquisition, we're also going to have to link up with the requirements side of this house. And so on the Air Force end of things, we are very closely integrating what we're doing in the ACT transformation work with what our A57 shop is doing in the requirements arena. And we're building a very synergistic set of processes so that we're collectively moving this conversation forward together. But underneath the PAE directly, that PAE owns all of the acquisition-related authorities that are required, but doesn't assume more than those acquisition authorities.
Will changes in the workforce or in the skill set that's required by the workforce happen as a result of this change? What does that look like structurally for the teams?
Yeah, so I think the workforce skill sets that we're going to need to continue to emphasize as we're moving forward is the ability to take smart risk. I say speed kills, wear a seatbelt, right? So we're trying to speed these programs up because we're assuming a lot of operational risk when we delay programs. But as we do that, we're going to assume more acquisition risk, right? And so in order to prevent what I'll call reckless driving on the acquisition side of this, right? We need to set those programs up in a way that actually allows the program to accelerate, but to do it in a way that doesn't, create fatalities if we have a failure along the way. And a great example of that actually is our collaborative combat aircraft approach right now. You may recall that we had one crash a few weeks ago. Again, moving very quickly, much faster than we would historically. But because we had set the guardrails up on that program, we had the incident occur. and it occurred where and how we wanted to be able to manage that risk. And so we didn't have any loss of life. We were able to recover the CCA, and we're going through the process right now of figuring out how we get back up on a horse.
The risk management that you apply, the framework that you apply, is it the same as traditional risk management frameworks, or is it different because of the types of things like airplanes that you're trying to push through the system?
Yeah, so I think what we want to do is we want to take a more nuanced look at the way that we manage that risk. Obviously, if there's a human involved in it, we're going to weigh that very carefully, and we're going to be very specific about how we manage that risk as a function of how we're doing that testing and how we're making sure that we have good safety of flight that continues right in an unbroken track record that we've had historically. But I think what we need to do is we need to take that model as one type of risk management, and we need to look at how we apply that model to different types of acquisitions. And maybe we don't need all of those same mitigations if, like on the unmanned side of this, we don't have a human involved. Or as we get into more things like unmanned aircraft and smaller scale, what does that look like, right? What does it look like on the software front? What does it look like as we're going into the munitions conversation? So all of that is really predicated on understanding what the operational impact looks like with that part of the weapon system, and then how do we gauge the risk getting to that point.
General, you mentioned there are 5 out of the 18 portfolios that you're doing this with. Command control, communications, and battle management is one. I read from Defense News, fighters and advanced aircraft, nuclear command control and communications, propulsion, and weapons sectors. How did you decide on those 5 out of the 18? You touched on it, but more detail on that one. So
I think fighters and advanced aircraft represents what we'll call more of the traditional platform-based approach to how we do things. And they're representative of things like fighters and advanced aircraft, mobility, trainers, aircraft-related things where we're putting people inside of those planes and we're flying them. C3BM is really about a software-centric view, and how do we rapidly iterate on our software to get capability at almost like a 90-day kind of cadence. Very different. Propulsion is in there because there's a set of enterprise-wide kinds of things that we have to be able to field across multiple different PAEs, and they represent engines across many different platforms, right? Very different kind of a problem. And then NC3, in some ways, like C3BM, is all about like, hey, how do I create a distributed network of capability and do that, but do it now in a very secure way, in a nuclear environment.
I read again from the Defense News story, these moves are the first of a slate of changes to the Air Force's acquisition processes. What's next in that slate, sir?
Yeah, sure. So again, going back to that authorities conversation, so we've looked at contracting, we've looked at airworthiness. Right now we're talking about how the engineering authorities continue to evolve, how the financial management authorities continue to evolve. We have a team looking at test right now. Those will continue to roll out over the next several weeks. And then we have another tranche of things that we'll look at underneath of that as Mr. Bailey, who is our performing the duties of our service acquisition executive, continues to make decisions around what that looks like and how we continue to progress.
Final thought, how will you measure the success of each of these PAEs? Is it the same as you measured success in the PEOs, or will there be different measures?
So I think we're going to be very mission focused in our outcomes, right? Part of where I think we've fallen into the ditch on one side of this road is we get so focused on cost, schedule, and performance metrics that we forget that there's an operational thing on the other end of this that we have to get after. So we're putting that operational outcome squarely in the middle of the conversation every time we have it. And that way what we're doing is we're grounding the entire team on the impact operationally of either meeting or not meeting our commitments on that. That, I think, is fundamentally a cultural shift that we're trying to make inside of the workforce and putting that operational impact front and center.
General, that cultural change usually turns out to be the toughest piece, doesn't it?
100%.
How do you want to move that needle?
Well, I think it goes into the doing as much as the saying, right? And so, again, that CCA example is a great example of us looking at it and saying, hey, we want you to take more risk. And then the first failure that you have, everybody's going to stop and watch really close to see what you do with that failure. If you knee jerk and you pull that back, then they're going to look at it and go, okay, it's just more talk. If you handle it the way that you want them to handle it, and you set that example, then I think you start to see that same behavior being emulated across the rest of the enterprise.
Thank you for joining me today, sir. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
You can read more about the acquisition changes at the Air Force on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Coming up, the next guiding principle for AI could be an oldie but goodie. FedGov Today continues in just a moment.
Innovation doesn't wait, and neither do we. At Maximus, we solve problems, streamlining operations, delivering solutions at speed and scale that drive measurable results. From strategy to execution, we simplify complexity, building trust through expertise and innovative technology. Every service, every time. Efficient government delivered. We don't follow innovation, we drive it. Maximus.
Welcome back. One of the core decision-making frameworks of the Pentagon could be an important tool in implementing artificial intelligence effectively. Speed is one reason experts believe the OODA loop works well in AI settings. Steve Dirks is Senior Account Executive at SamDesk. Steve, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. What's the connection between OODA loop, which has been around since the 1970s, and artificial intelligence, which has been around for a long time too, but really only prominent in the last couple of years?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. I think when you look at the OODA loop was designed, as you say, back in the 1950s by Air Force Colonel John Boyd. And OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. It's a decision platform. And the principle of the platform is that if you can do your decision cycles faster than your adversary, you get a distinct advantage strategically and operationally, because it puts your adversary in a position of reacting to scenarios that have already changed or have been adapted. And so this is a perfect use case for AI to speed up that OODA loop. From our perspective, working with publicly and commercially available data, you've got billions and billions of signals that are out there. Everyone who has a cell phone is creating a signal these days, as well as other sensors and signals that we're collecting. And so how can we take that, disseminate it down, get decision-ready context to leaders who are making those decisions in the OODA loop, and be able to, accelerate that process? AI's been used in our company over the last number of years to do a lot of the basic functions around, taking signals and doing veracity checks, doing quality checks, weeding out mis and disinformation, language translation, ranking the severity, to be able to provide that context. But the next iterations of this using agentic AI is where it really gets exciting, to be able to put agentic analysts in place that are not only doing, all of those basic AI type functions, but also looking at how you take reasoning models to provide that decision-ready context. So by using AI to monitor on a continuous basis all of the signals, and then monitor that against the operational or the mission objectives, provide the reasoning, deliver that decision-ready alerting to our customer, they're able to rapidly scale and accelerate the OODA loop.
So scale seems to be the biggest challenge here, because you detailed the data and signal proliferation that's happening in the department, that explosion. There's an explosion in use of these agents inside the department. I saw a report this week that is growing exponentially inside the Pentagon. What's the combination of those two things to scale effectively for an organization like DoD?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's lots to unpack in that arena. So for us at SamDesk, as an AI technology company, that's what we're focused on. In order to really get the scale and the user adoption across the Department of War, you're looking at upwards of 3+ million potential users. So what we're seeing is, from a technology investment perspective, the acquisition of the technology itself is relevantly simplistic. It's easy, but from that point forward, how do you make sure that they get the full value out of their investment? When you look at most software vendors are providing a subscription-based service that comes with some customer success support in terms of how you're going to drive that user adoption across an enterprise organization. For SamDesk, what we identified is being best in class in AI we aren't best in class in understanding how the inner workings of the Department of War is. So we knew that we needed a partner, a tier 1 advisory firm to help us drive that user adoption. And we've partnered with KPMG in that regard. And what works really well for our customers in that regard, and especially in defense, is that a lot of the leaders and members that come into KPMG have served for most of their careers, in the department. They're coming out of military service, transitioning to the private sector. They have that deep domain experience, mission experience, relationships across the department. So now we're not just getting the early adopters and innovators who are able to use these AI tools and implement them at scale, but we're also getting, the masses coming on board and being able to actually, leverage the full utility of the tools. And that way the department gets full value, and that's a win-win for everyone.
Steve, thanks for being here today. I appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Francis.
You can read more about AI and the OODA Loop on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, ARPA-H's cyber simulation plan to protect healthcare. FedGov Today continues in a moment.
With the technologies that we're talking about, you have the opportunity to really perform a rapid look-back assessment over the past, pick your time period, to identify where your real risks lie and not your theoretical list from what you can brainstorm or how your programs are set up. Taking that approach first is going to allow you to really understand where your potential challenges are so that you can design a remediation program going forward to be able to address them live and virtually in real time.
One of the biggest things that we've been seeing within the federal government for quite some time is aging technology. So the systems are getting older and they're not being able to churn through the magnitude of data as quickly as is what is needed to be able to identify this fraud, waste, and abuse. So leveraging new and emerging technologies. Artificial intelligence obviously is at the front of a lot of the discussions we're having, but advanced technologies to be able to go through that data at scale and at speed that it's happening.
Welcome back. 2 top priority programs at the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health will drive cybersecurity improvements in the healthcare sector. The aim of both programs is getting ahead of cyber threats instead of just reacting. Alicia Jackson's director of ARPA-H. Before we talk about those 2 particular programs in particular, what's the broader cybersecurity agenda of ARPA-H, ma'am? Welcome.
So thank you so much for having me. ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, exists for one reason, which is to drive healthcare breakthroughs in years and not decades. When we're thinking about cybersecurity as it pertains to health, it spans everything from medical devices, pacemakers that folks might have, all the way to hospital cybersecurity systems, those types of networks, all the way to the new agentic AI tools we see rolling out, both on the consumer front, but also starting to go through FDA as well. And when we look at those, unfortunately, the healthcare sector has been far behind what we might see in national security, financial services, yet it's far more complex than any of those because we have legacy devices, we have brand new internet enabled devices, we have hospital systems with devices they don't even know they have on their networks, and yet it's chronically underfunded. And so a lot of these healthcare systems don't have a ton of cybersecurity expertise. A lot of the big companies that are in the cybersecurity space have not focused at all on hospital systems, healthcare, and most hospitals don't even have the budget, let alone the capabilities to be able to really understand how to protect themselves.
Do they know what they don't know? Or are they not even aware of what the risk landscape looks like, what the threat landscape looks like?
I think more and more as you see increasing cyber attacks, ransomware attacks on hospitals, I think folks are starting to wake up to it. But as we've dove into this space, especially when looking at legacy medical equipment that's internet connected, for example, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that people don't know about, either on that equipment themselves, but then we've also seen that 96% of hospitals have operating systems that are vulnerable at the same time. So I would say a lot of folks don't know what they don't know at this point.
So the two programs that I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, the first one is DigiHeals, the Digital Health Security Program. What's underneath that, and what's the goal of that program?
So that was one of our first programs in this space. What's interesting about this is we actually recruited folks out of DARPA, where they were working on cybersecurity for national defense, and brought it into the healthcare space. And what that did is really look at different components of the health ecosystem. So a lot of medical device work, some EHR work, general systems work, and really trying to understand, okay, what are these vulnerabilities? How do we patch them? And through that work, we realized the problem was much bigger than we understood, where even in some folks were patching maybe vulnerabilities, but just introducing more vulnerabilities. And so the first step was just kind of building the basic toolkit for upgrade.
There's one program in particular that struck me out underneath the DigiHeals program called the Crash Cart.
Yes.
Describe the Crash Cart, because it's a fascinating, is it a piece of equipment? Is that the right thing to call it?
It's a system.
It's a cart.
It's a system, essentially, that you can roll up with. You can throw it in the back of a van, and its entire purpose is, after a hospital goes down due to a cyber attack, these guys roll in on the van, you boot it up, and you can basically bring your emergency department back online within 30 minutes. And that's astounding, because I think for your folks who've read the news and things like that, you'll find that often it takes weeks or months to recover from a cyber attack that really shut down all the systems. What that means is essentially not only are patients not getting care, but the hospitals lose a ton of revenue during that period of time, especially if their EHRs are down. They can't bill for services. And so you start seeing rural hospitals literally go out of business because of these. And the fact that we can just drive right up in a van and get that hospital up and running on a whole totally separate network is incredible.
How do you go about developing something like that in an organization like ARPA-H? How much of that is industry bringing you solutions? How much of it is developing solutions in-house, or some combination of those things?
So what's really interesting is that we don't have any labs or research of our own that we do. Everything is external. And so really it's the program manager, in this case Andrew Carney is our PM, and he put out the challenge to the community. And then you'll have folks from academia, private sector, startups, industry, come together and propose solutions. And so this team got together and said, hey, we think we can do this, and built this capability. And the great thing is that once we see it, we can double down on it and fund it even more to show that it's working and really scale it.
I mentioned there were two. The second one is Upgrade. What's behind Upgrade?
Yes, Upgrade is kind of like phase 2, essentially, of DigiHeals. So this is actually mapping an entire hospital network. So going to a hospital, creating a digital twin of that entire network, mapping every single device that might be part of that hospital network, identifying vulnerabilities, figuring out how we can patch those vulnerabilities while the entire hospital is still operating. And then the idea is we could scale this to every single hospital in the nation, large or small.
And I imagine AI is turbocharging your ability to see what's on the networks,
yes,
given some of the things we're learning about,
yes,
its ability to find vulnerabilities.
Yes, that's absolutely critical, especially as we start to see AI used on both offense and defense at this point.
Mm-hmm. What are the hospitals understanding about their vulnerabilities that they didn't understand before?
I think it really varies across hospital size. So very large hospitals, top tier hospitals, I think have a better understanding than, I would say, probably 80% of the rest of the hospitals at that point. But even then, they've never had these tools available. And so I think folks from other parts of industry, especially defense, national security, they might think that this is totally normal, but unfortunately they haven't even had the ability to buy these tools. They haven't had the ability to build their own cyber defense teams. And so I would say this is a brand new capability for everyone in the entire field. You
mentioned for DigiHeals that you recruited from DARPA. You have some inside track there, being at DARPA before you came to ARPA-H.
Yes.
How does your time at DARPA inform what you're doing in your job now?
The best thing about being at DARPA is you're just thrown into the deep end. And immediately you need to pick up the culture, how they operate, how you fund things, how you kill things that aren't working, how you double down on what's working, how you go after the hardest problems. Luckily enough, I also went and built 2 companies post DARPA. So I really understand that startup, early stage experience and working in the private sector. That's been so valuable coming into ARPA-H because we are a new agency. We're only about 3 or 4 years old at this point. So we really are in that kind of growth stage. So both my founder experience, building something from scratch, building that technical capability as well as bringing the operating model from DARPA that's so proven for over the last 50, 60 years, and bringing that to focus on healthcare breakthroughs has really been incredibly valuable.
In that context, what does the maturation process or maturation strategy, in your view, look like for ARPA-H?
Yeah, the biggest thing we can do is stay as lean as possible for our mission. So we abhor bureaucracy. If you're going to get breakthroughs, if you have to take risk, if you have to move at speed, you cannot have bureaucracy. So staying very lean, staying very focused, understanding what's in our mission and what's not, and just pure execution against that. That's the most important thing we can do now. And as we demonstrate successes, we can then scale from there.
What do you need then workforce-wise as you start to mature the organization?
Yeah, so what's really unique is we can bring in people from industry, academia, startups, other parts of the federal government. Program managers really run the place. They're the ones crafting these big visions, taking things to reality through programs. That's the number one thing we want to hire, really entrepreneurial, technically competent folks who can really come in, hit the ground running, go build an incredible vision, work with the best people on earth to make breakthroughs happen.
Final thought, how do you measure their performances in their individual categories?
Number one thing is, are they taking enough risk? Are they thinking far enough? If it's incremental, they're thinking too small. Number two, are they great managers of the programs? Do they have the will to cut the things that aren't working? That's very different than the rest of the government, but really cut off the things that aren't working, be really truthfully honest about it, but then recover from that and go find the things that are.
Alicia, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
You can read more about everything we discussed on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. This week on the FedGov Today podcast, past, present, and future on Project Maven from two of the program's mission owners. You can find the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and always on demand at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment.
Adopting and bringing in this innovation into the various mission sets. And so I think those two, the combination of this explosion of data with the innovation around how not just to collect the data, but to enrich it and analyze it, and all the tools that are being developed and coming to market, again, I think is leading to this point of where OSINT is being looked at as a core pillar of an intelligence.
Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, the IT Vendor Management Office Annual Summit's coming this Wednesday to the Deloitte Conference Center in Roslyn. Government speakers, including the new Acting FAST Commissioner at GSA, Laura Stanton, will show you how reforms like OneGov and the FAR overhaul are reshaping federal acquisition. ACT-IAC is hosting the event. You can read more about it and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10. The Deputy Assistant Secretary of Interior, Andrea Brandon, and the Commerce Department CIO, Brian Epley, will be here. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.